Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to share my screen. I have a little presentation for you guys. Okay, so today's Maker Talk. I've never done one of these, so I'm excited. So I'll start with introducing myself. I am Anna Southworth, and I have created the business Tiny Tudor Cookies. And I'm a self-taught cookie artist. So similar to what you guys are doing right now, I don't know if you have any experience with cookie decorating, but somebody's got to start somewhere. I did a lot of research at the forefront of all of this, which really paid off in the end. So I'm self-taught. I live in the DC metro area. I've been doing custom cookies, and I used to do classes prior to COVID. And that's kind of taken a little break for the moment, but hopefully I'll get back into that sooner than later. I'm also a mom of two. I have a 6 and a 9-year-old, a boy and a girl. And right now I'm off of work, but I'm typically a full-time special education transition teacher for Fairfax County. So that's me. And I just chose this picture because I was so excited that my cookies were put in the Washingtonian Weddings magazine once. It was like my glory day. I was very excited about that. So I chose that picture to introduce myself. So today, the things that we're going to be covering we're going to cover the first thing. I think it's really important when you get started with doing decorated cookies, because you can't just use any type of cookie to do this. So I'm going to share with you some really great cookie recipes to get you started, and as well as the most important recipe, which is the royal icing recipe, which is what I use to make these decorated cookies. So we will review that, and then we're going to get into something that if you're really excited about decorating cookies, I think the hardest part or the most challenging part is making sure your icing consistencies are good, because that can make or break your cookies. So I'm going to go through and do some demos for you guys so that you can see what it's like, how to make the different consistencies, and what you use for what type of project. So we'll do that second, and then I'm going to go through some of the basics of just decorating your cookies using the icing that we're going to make together. And then the last part will be just adding the detail work to the cookies, which is my favorite part. You can make a very basic cookie and it looks beautiful, but then you can add some detail and it just takes it to a whole new level. So those are the things that we're going to be covering today. And first, we're going to start with finding your favorite recipes. Okay, so for me, this was something that I spent a lot of time, I tried a lot of different recipes. I went to Pinterest, tried okay, what non-spreading cookie recipes are out there that I can try. And that was great, but I'm also a perfectionist. So I actually found a really great recipe, and I'm gonna show it to you in a minute. And I've kind of tweaked it from this particular recipe, and I'll kind of share with you what I do with mine. But it's the best thing to get started with a really good recipe, one that doesn't spread too much, because the part of the decorated cookies, you kind of want them to be more defined. And then we will also look at the royal icing recipe, which actually comes from the same site. And you'll probably recognize this person if any of you guys have been to Michael's craft store. You may have seen some of the products there. Okay, so who I'm talking about is Sweet Sugar Belle. Her name's actually Callie, and she has been doing decorated cookies for forever, and now she has a product line that she sells at Michael's, and she is actually the go-to for getting started with your recipes. Like I mentioned before, you can also go to Pinterest. There are tons of recipes to explore there, but I feel like giving you this start is a really good place. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and you'll see the basic sugar cookie recipe. And I'll tell you kind of how I have changed this a little bit. But as you can see, these they're, you know, this is a particular cookie cutter and they didn't spread too much. However, one of the things I do take out of this recipe, I'll share with you in just a second, as we go through the ingredients. And it's because of that spreading situation. So I am not a baker who does like quadruples my dough. I'm more of an artist first, baker second. So I love like finding a recipe I like, and I don't mind making multiple batches of like one set of dough. And one set of this dough will make you about 15 to 20 cookies, depending on how large the cookies are. So as you can see, you start with 2 sticks of unsalted butter. I usually just leave it out for a while, but I've also gotten lazy and I've put it in the microwave for like 15 seconds and it still tastes the same. So if you don't have the time, you can do that. This recipe calls for confectioner's sugar, but you can also just use 1 cup of regular sugar. Either one will totally do the trick. I always use 1 egg. And then this is where you can get creative with the extracts that you use. So I use what Callie uses here. I use the 2 to 2.5 teaspoons of vanilla. And then I add 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of almond. I just like the taste of that, but you can get really creative and there are different emulsions and extracts that you can use. So that's another thing that is kind of cool about making your recipe. You can kind of make it your own this way. And then depending on like if there's humidity in the air, I might need a little more flour, but typically it's about 2 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour. And then this is the part I omit from my recipe. I don't use any baking powder. The baking powder makes it a little fluffier, more like a cakey version of a cookie, but it also spreads a little bit. So I have taken it out and my cookies still taste wonderful. It's more like a shortbread cookie kind of texture versus like the typical sugar cookie. And then I always use a teaspoon of salt, and I think that adds a really nice touch. So that's the basic recipe, and we are going to be sharing this presentation with you guys eventually. So hopefully these links will be there for you to use. But if you just wanted to make a note of Sweet Sugar Belle, you can go there, and at the top of her site, as you can see here, if I can get up there, it has recipes. Super easy to find. Everything's right there. You don't have to, like some blogs on Pinterest, you don't have to scroll like page after page after page to get to the actual recipe. Another thing I like about her. So the next recipe I want to share with you guys is the royal icing recipe. I tried a lot of royal icing recipes at the beginning, and this is like my go-to. I will tell you, I do add 1 more ingredient, but that was just as of recently. And the more you play around with these things, the more you find out what works for you. So go down to the royal icing recipe. Okay, it is so simple. I don't know if you guys have ever made royal icing, but it is probably the most simple recipe ever. You just take a 2-pound bag of powdered sugar, and the key ingredient is the meringue powder. You can also use egg whites, but I don't like working with that as much because it makes the icing really, really heavy. But the meringue powder is awesome. You can find it pretty much, well, you can find it at Michael's craft store. I think it's the only like main store that is found a lot of places that you can find it, but you can also find it at other baking stores like Fran's. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of Fran's, which is in Fairfax. They sell the meringue powder as well. But if you're in a crunch and you are really just eager to get started and you don't feel like going out shopping, you can always go online and order it. So I usually use about 5 to 6 tablespoons of meringue powder. To be honest, like 5 does the trick, and it's kind of on the pricier side of all the ingredients. So, I mean, less is more if you're asking me. And then I either use 2 to 3, usually about a tablespoon of vanilla. I don't do a lot with my icing in terms of flavor, I usually try that with my cookies instead, but I know a lot of cookie artists that will throw in like the lemon extracts and things like that to their icing, and I'm sure it tastes amazing. So that's the other place you can get creative. And then you just take, I usually use about 3/4 cup of warm water. If you're going for a really, really stiff icing, then you would use about a 1/2 cup. And that allows for that consistency. But literally you just put it in your food processor and you turn it on and on high speed, and it whips up in about 5 minutes and you are good to go. Your stand mixer. And I know you can do this also if you don't have a stand mixer, you can just use the handheld one. It might take you a little bit longer, but you'll know when it's at the right consistency because it'll be super whipped. And it'll have stiff peaks, which I will show you my icing in just a minute. Okay, so those are the like go-to ingredients. And I thought that that would be just a really good place to get you started. I'm not going to go through all the instructions. You guys are welcome to do that. If you just make sure you have those ingredients and you follow that to a T, you're going to be good. And then again, once you've tried it, if you want to do something different with it, by all means, add it, make it your own, which is really fun. Okay, I'm coming back to here. Okay, so I think it's so helpful to provide anybody who's starting this journey or who is already on this journey with some tips to help you, because I literally almost never made another royal icing cookie after my first time, because I'm a perfectionist and I thought I was going to do it perfectly the first time, and that's just not realistic. So I advise you to be patient. It is okay to fail. It's okay to kind of just figure it out and take some time. The frustration is all worth it. Like you'll just get better and better at this. I'm kind of shocked to see where I began with my cookies and where I'm at now. Like I had no idea I could transform my cookies and do so much detail work like I do now. So just be patient. A reminder to be bold. Like I was mentioning earlier, I've given you a couple of basic recipes to get started, but make it your own. Try different flavors. Even try different recipes and see what you like. In the fall, sometimes I'll do like a fall spice cookie. So very similar. It's the same recipe. I just will add some additional spices in there, and that's a huge hit with some of my clients. So just be bold. It's fun. The other thing, just work slowly, because this is the part where if you're not working slowly, it could backfire on you, especially at first. So like when you're rolling out your dough, to the right thickness, and I usually like about a 1/4 inch cookie. If you're just using a standard traditional roller, that's what I use. You just take your time to get to that right thickness. You don't want them to be too thin, but you also don't want them to be like super thick. So about 1/4 of an inch is great. And there are some rollers out there where they have like the bands on them that will let you do it with like 1/4 inch. If you wanted to do that, by all means. I just kind of have gotten into a groove with my traditional roller, so that's what I use. Also, every oven is different. I just renovated my house and we had this old school oven, loved it. It worked like a charm, but very different from my new ovens. So what would take me 10 minutes in my old oven will now take me 15 in my new oven. So I like my cookies to not be really browned on the bottoms, which if they are brown, it doesn't mean that they're any less tasteful. It just means that they might not be the consistency you're going for. They'll definitely be a little more crunchy, but you're welcome to do that. So I like to take them out right before they get brown, because that means they're still a little bit soft. So those are a few tips. And then just a reminder, baking is about multitasking. If you're organized and prepared, it's half the battle, which is so true. That's why I'm hoping that by giving you a bunch of these upfront tips and items that you may need to get started, that you'll be in a much better place to get through it. I was not as prepared when I first started. So I'm excited to share all of this with you guys. Okay, so The next section is icing consistencies and color. Okay, so this is the fun part. And again, you have to be patient with this because this is the part where like, if you add too much water, it could ruin your icing. If you don't add enough, it might not be the consistency you're going for. It might be too thick. So that's why I'm gonna have some fun with you guys and show you how I get the consistencies that I prefer. All right, so let's talk some icing consistencies and color. Okay, so, this is really fun. There is a such thing as a tipless icing bag, which took me a couple of years to discover. I had no idea. When I first started on this journey, I went out and bought like the regular like cake bags, and then I would get all the tips, those little silver tips in every shape and size. I would get them all. And it was, for me personally, like I know some people still like they love using that and that's their preference, but for me, the tipless icing bag is my go-to because I don't have to worry about putting the tips. I don't have to clean them. I don't have to go through all of that, which is quite a process, especially when you're mixing a lot of colors. So tipless icing bags are my go-to. I shop actually, I try to use small businesses as much as possible. Truly Mad Plastics is one of my go-tos. They sell really great ones. But again, if you're in a crunch and you need it really quickly, Amazon always has what you're looking for when it comes to cookie decorating. Okay, so less is more. So I mentioned a second ago that I use water to make my icing consistencies, and it's really, really easy to like pour too much water in really fast because you're not used to it, or you didn't think that it was a lot of water that you poured in. But I promise you, if you start like small and then work towards the consistency you're going for, you'll be very happy. Excuse me. I also recommend using a squirt bottle to get started with because it doesn't come out as quickly. I've gotten to the place where I just use like a cup of water and pour it in really slowly, but the squirt bottle really kind of helps prevent you from putting too much in at once. And again, I'll show you in just a minute what I mean. And then in terms of coloring your royal icing, there are tons of companies out there now. I'm a creature of comfort, and I discovered Americolor at the very beginning of my cookie journey, and it has just stuck. I mean, you can go to Michael's, you can find tons of gel colorings there. But the thing I like about Americolor is that the colors just always end up so much more vibrant than most. And I really like that. And I do a lot of custom cookies, and usually my clients want something very specific. So I feel like Americolor is a really great go-to. And again, you can find Americolor if you want to go to an actual shop. There is the Franz Cake and Candy Supplies in Fairfax. I'm not familiar with any places in DC, but there may be some baking places that you guys know of or in this area. But Franz is great. They have everything you would be looking for. And they do sell Americolor. But again, you can also find it online if that's what you prefer to do. Okay. So some items that you're gonna need to get started. You're gonna need a mixing bowl, you're gonna need water, you're gonna need a spatula, mixing spatula, a spoon is totally fine. You're gonna need your gel food coloring, your tipless bags. I'm gonna demonstrate with tipless bags today, but if you wanna use tips, if that's what you already have on hand, that's totally fine too. A scribe tool, and I'll show you what that is. I'll show you like a traditional scribe tool, but you can also use a toothpick. That's why I've put that in this image here. You also need your royal icing, scissors, and I always have a damp paper towel. Like if you want to be more resourceful, you can always like use a cloth, like a reusable cloth that's damp that you can work with. And I'll show you why that's important when we get started on the demo. Okay, so let's see. The outline, now we are going to, I'm going to show you guys how to mix the icing. Wait, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to show you the outline versus the flood. Then I'm going to show you the icing mixture. That makes sense. Okay, so outline versus flood consistency. So when you're dealing with royal icing, some people have too many, like if you're making 1,000 cookies a week, some people just skip the outline step. For me, I think it defines my cookies more. I love the outline step. It is an extra step, but I think it's worth it. So I'm going to show you guys what the outline is and then the flood. It'll make more sense to you in just a minute. Okay, so outline consistency. This is the thicker consistency, and it's the what you're basically outlining your cookie with before you flood it in with the thinner consistency. So I've kind of given you a little picture here so you can kind of see it makes like a straight line. It's not spreading. It kind of keeps its shape. And I think that this is like, you can either go really, really stiff, like I mentioned before, if you're making your icing and you're using a half of a cup of water for that 2-pound bag versus 3/4 of a cup, you're gonna see a pretty big difference in the peaks of your icing. Half a cup will be very thick, so you'll probably want to add a little bit of water. Whereas if you do the 3/4, you might not need any water at all. Today I did the 3/4 cup of water, and you'll see that I'm not even going to use any extra water to make my outline. Okay, and then the flood consistencies, and it really just depends on your project. It can change from project to project. So I recommend a 10 to 15 second flooding icing consistency for most of my projects. And I know you probably have no idea what I mean unless you've done this before. But when I do the demo, I will explain what that means. So a 10 to 15 second icing consistency when flooding. If I'm doing lettering, I do a lot of lettering work to like personalize cookies for my clients. When I do that, I try to avoid the 10 to 15 flood, and I work with more of like an 18 to 20 second flood. Just because it won't cater as much, crater as much, because sometimes if you have too much water in your icing and you're working with really small spaces, little air pockets can get in there, and when it's drying, it'll form holes in your icing, and you do want to try to avoid that, which is why I said you have to be patient with the icing, but it is worth it once you've got it figured out, and it doesn't take that long. You just kind of have to work with it and get a feel for it. Okay, so that's the flood consistency. And now we are gonna color and mix some icing. I'm gonna do a little demo for you. All right, so you can kind of see my workspace. All right, there we go. Okay, so I've got my bowl, got a couple of, I love using the silicone spatulas. Like a spoon works too, that's what I started with, but then I've just like really enjoyed these because they scrape the bowl a lot easier. I've got what I had mentioned before, my tipless icing bags. And the other thing I like about these versus like your regular like cake bags is they're a lot thinner. Like you can just crumble it up really easily. And when you have the icing in there and you're working with a lot of icing, that's actually really great. So this is my tipless bag. Like I mentioned, you can use, if you don't have a squirt bottle, you can just use a little thing of water. Or if you have a squirt bottle, and you can also find these at Michael's too. You may have some on hand, but this is the squirt bottle for the water. I've got that cookie that I just showed you in the presentation. And I also, this is just a random cup I have, but I like the height of it. A lot of people don't even use this to put their icing bag in, but I'll show you. For me, it just helps the ice, like I just am able to pour the icing better. So I just open it up like that, and then I will pour my icing in. So for me, that works. You don't even really need one, but I feel like if you don't use one, it's easy to get icing kind of all up in the top and it gets really messy. So I just try to avoid that. So there's my cup. And then here is the scribe tool that I mentioned. Again, a toothpick, totally fine. I started with using toothpicks, but literally you can get like 8 of these on Amazon for about $4. And for someone who uses them all the time, and I host classes, this has just been really convenient. So this is my scribe tool. These are my AmeriColor colors. So here's a bigger one. You can see I've got icing stuck on it because I use it a lot. And then here are the smaller ones. And again, these are things you can find at a local baking shop. Michael's does not carry this brand, but maybe some mom and pop shops will. But again, you can order it online. So here also is the icing, which is very important. So I'm going to show you guys this. So I keep it in an airtight container because if you leave it out, it will literally start to dry and crust over the top, and you do not want that. So keep it in an airtight container when you're not working with it. If you're using it like really quickly and you're kind of using the whole thing up at once, I recommend like putting a damp cloth over it, damp paper towel. That'll keep it from crusting over so that you don't have to keep taking your lid off. Okay, so this is with 3/4 of a cup of water. Also, the other ingredient I forgot to mention that I've started adding to my icing, I add some corn syrup to my icing. And that just gives it more of a sheen in the end, which I really like. And it kind of makes the icing just a little more flexible to work with. But this is the thickest consistency with 3/4. If I had whipped it longer than 5 minutes, it probably would have gotten a little bit thicker. But I would recommend if you're doing like flour work where you're using a tip to make flowers, I would definitely go with less water because the icing will spread too much. So this is the original consistency. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take this and my bag that I've already put in here, and I'm literally just going to put this in here. Sorry for shaking the camera, because it's already at the outline consistency that I'm going for. And I'm just gonna put that over there. Okay. So now what I like to do, I like to push the icing down as far as possible. Sometimes, I'll move it over here. Sometimes you'll get some air pockets. So you just push it down, and then I just tie it in a knot. I'll show you. So there you go. You've got the knot. I'm crazy and I don't like this much hanging over the side. You can also get smaller bags, but I like working with the larger bags for some reason. And then I'll just, anytime I don't need is the whole thing, I'll just cut it off and it's easier to work with for me. Okay, so that's the first consistency. So super easy. Now, if you had done less water and you have a much thicker consistency to work with, and you don't want it to be that thick for your outline, then all you have to do is add like a little squirt to it and mix it up in your bowl and you're good to go. That'll create that same consistency that we just had. Okay, so we've got our white outline, which we're going to use for the cookie demo. And now I am going to go with showing you guys how to color with the AmeriColor. So we're going to need a lighter green for our flooding color, and we're going to actually use a darker green for a detail work that we're going to do. So I put about that much in there. This will probably decorate, flood, I would say about 5 cookies. So like one set of icing like this will probably flood, it could flood about 3 dozen cookies. That's about the standard if you're being conscientious using your icing. But you also get a feel for that. Like you'll see sometimes if you used way too much, you're like, I have so much left over, freeze your icing. Your icing freezes extremely well. Highly encourage that. Okay, so now we've got, this is our outline consistency, and we're gonna add our color. Okay, so I've got my AmeriColor teal. And I'm gonna add a little squirt. And then I'm gonna mix it up. And it's a little bluish, which, I mean, that's the other fun thing about your projects. Like, unless a client says, I want this exact color, it's kind of fun to play around with colors, and you don't have to go super traditional, even though we're doing a cactus. I know they're not blue, but I like teal. but you can also lighten it up a little bit or brighten it up a little bit. So I'm gonna add some yellow. And it's just gonna make it more of that cactus green color, which is fun. And as you can see, I mean, just a little squirt of AmeriColor, try to get it up close for you, is already super vibrant. So that's partly why I just really like working with AmeriColor. It just really gets to the right color you're going for without using too much gel. Okay, so we're still at an outline consistency, and I'm just gonna, for sake of time, I'm gonna outline in the white today, or the dark green that we're gonna create. And now we're gonna make our flood consistency. So again, less is more to start. So I'm gonna use a little squirt bottle, do a little pour there, a little squirt, and then I'm gonna mix it up. And you'll see like how quickly the consistency changes. Okay, so when I was talking about seconds earlier, you're probably like, I have no idea what she's talking about. All right, so you can kind of figure out the consistency that you're going for. If you like just do a little, even just like that, like make the icing look like that. And then as you watch it, it's gonna slowly start to flatten out. It's kind of like enjoyable to watch it just flatten out. And then it gets to flat. Now that was about an 18 to 20 seconds. So if I were doing lettering, that would be perfect, okay? But since I'm not doing lettering, we don't need it quite that thick. And if you did do it that thick and you were like, I don't wanna remake it, when you pick up your cookie, you can shake it around a little bit and it will eventually flatten out and it'll be fine. But sometimes I want it just to be the perfect consistency to start so that I don't have to do that. So I'm gonna add another little squirt, not much, just a little. And hopefully that'll get me to the consistency I am going for, which is about that 10-second consistency. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-ish. Okay, 8 to 10, that's fine. Okay, so this is like a really good flooding consistency. If you keep adding water, it'll flood your cookies a lot quicker, but the problem with that is like the water might take forever to dry and it might not even ever dry. You'll even have it under a fan and you'll try it overnight and it just doesn't get to where you want it to be, and it also looks very opaque and not shiny. So that's why the consistencies are so important. All right, so we've got that. I'm gonna add it to my handy cup here. All right. Sorry, you're not seeing the full view there. Okay, and then now I'm just gonna quickly add a darker color for you. Right, what you're hearing is me just tying my knot. And I'm just gonna take another little bit of the icing. I have a new spatula, don't need much. I'm gonna put it in there. And then I am going to add just a little bit more this time. Okay, since I didn't have much in there, that'll make it pretty dark. Okay, and then as you can see, I've already got my consistency for outline, and that's what I'm looking for with this darker color. All right, so now I've got that. I'm gonna add it to a bag, and I can show you. If you don't want to use the cup, you can just kind of make your own little cup and then stick it in. It just gets a little messy for me, so I try to avoid that. Okay, so now we've got that. Perfect, we've got our icing consistency colors. And now we're gonna go back to the presentation so I can show you how to decorate. Okay, so we've mixed the color. And now we're talking the basics of your step-by-step tutorial, which I'm going to show you guys in just a minute, but I just wanted to walk you through it so you understand what we're going to do. So you're going to need your icing that we just made, your cookies, the scribe tool, toothpicks fine, scissors, and a damp paper towel. And I put an F on this one just to define my flood and outline. When you get started, that's always helpful, just so you can figure out the difference. Even though one will feel thicker usually, it just helps. Okay, so cutting your tips. This is very important, and I'll demonstrate this in a second, but the cool thing about working with this type of bag, you can cut them as tiny as you want to make the smallest lines, or as big as you want to make really thick lines, but always start small. And then I recommend practicing, use paper towel just to see if it's like too thin for you, and then you can cut off a little bit more and make it a little thicker if needed. And then with outlining your cookie, it's important to kind of let the icing fall onto the cookie with gentle pressure. You're not pressing it against the cookie, because it'll kind of create clumpy, rough outlines, and you want it to kind of just fall. And you'll see, it really will kind of just fall onto the cookie. You'll get used to that. And then you'll outline your cookie. So for a basic shape, like a square, rectangle, triangle, you'll just outline the whole thing. But for what we're doing today, I'm going to outline in sections, because I want my sections to stand out, as you'll see. So I'll start with staggering, and I will do these two sections first to flood, and then I'll put it under a fan for a few minutes, and then I'll go back and fill in the final two sections. And this just separates them from each other so that it doesn't all flood together and look like that they aren't defined. And I just kind of like that. And again, just let them dry in front of a fan if you can. And then you can also leave them out. If you don't have a fan, you can leave them out for 20 to 30 minutes before you move to your next step. And then that will make that definition. So then you're gonna have a flooded cookie after this. Okay, so this is what I'm gonna demo now. Look, it's already there. So fun. Okay, so I'm gonna start with just the paper towel, and I am gonna just gonna go with that blue consistency that we did. And my scissors. Okay, so as you can see that pretty well. The tip, kind of trying to get there where you see the tip. Okay, so really pointy. I take a very little bit off of the top. Very little. Okay. And this is going to create a nice size line. I'll just play around with it, let it kind of fall, putting a little pressure. I hold the bag kind of like this with my thumb on the top, and I just put the pressure on my thumb and squeeze and let it fall. Okay, so now I'm going to, now that I showed you that, now I'm going to take the cookie and I'm going to do my sections. So like I said, I'm going to let it fall. And it just kind of makes its way onto the cookie. And then you can add the next one. Now, the reason why I use a damp paper towel is when you've been using the icing for a while, you may want to do this to the tip so that it doesn't crust over. I find that working with actual tips, it will crust over really quickly, and it's a lot harder to not make it clumpy when you use it again. That's just another little tip. And since we aren't going to have a lot of time today, I'm not going to do the drawing section. So I'm going to just add another line down here, actually a couple of lines, so that I get that definition we were talking about if you don't have time to dry it. Okay, and then I'm going to do this guy. And I know I'm going kind of fast, but please start at the speed that is most comfortable to you when you start this. And just let it fall. Okay. And now for the fun part, which people tell me is very relaxing. we're gonna flood. Okay, so we're gonna take that icing consistency that we made to about like a 8 to 10 second flood. I'm going to take a little thicker cut off of the end. You don't want to go too thick, so start small. But that just helps it kind of come out a little more quickly. I'm not going to put a lot of pressure on this. And I am going to just kind of go up to the line. And I'll show you in a second. If you don't feel like you're ready to go up to the line because you're afraid it's going to flood over, no worries. I'll show you another tip you can use. But then I just kind of go in a circular motion. I usually hold my wrist because your wrist will get tired just being in the air. So I will hold my wrist. And then as you can see, now this is where you can go back in with your little tool. And if there are any air pockets or any bubbles, you can pop them with the tool. Okay, I'll show you what else you can do with the tool in a second. So normally, like I said, I would stagger it. And I would let it dry in between, and I wouldn't have to put those thick lines in between each one. But today I just put the thick lines so that I could flood all sections. Okay. And then sometimes, like if you have a little thicker icing, I think I told you, you can just pick it up and shake it a little bit. That also works. Okay, so now, like I said, I would normally let it dry, but I'm just gonna flood the whole thing. The last section, I'm gonna show you what you can do with your scribe tool if you don't feel confident yet flooding it all the way to the outline. Okay. Fun, fun. And then if, like, as you can see, it didn't quite make it, so you can use this tool, which is actually what I was gonna show you in a second. You can get it to the outline. Okay, so now, if, like I said, if you don't feel comfortable going all the way to the line because you're afraid it's gonna flood over, which believe me, mine have flooded over before, I'm gonna just go a little bit away from that line. And at this point, I just want you guys to know, because it's the flood consistency, I'm really not putting much pressure on this bag. Okay, now you've got that. And I'm gonna take the little scribe tool, and I am gonna move it to the line in a circular section, in a circular motion rather. Okay, until it gets to that line, and then that means, you know, you're not running over. And that, we don't wanna run over. But if you do, it's okay. That's why I said trial and error. Okay, so now, as you can see, we have our sections and they are defined, but you do kind of see those lines. If you want to avoid those lines, you just wait. You have to wait and do the drying time after you stagger it. Okay, so we've got that. Now I'm going to go back to the last section of the presentation to show you how to do the detail work. Okay, so we're into section 4, all about the detail. Okay, this is my favorite. My favorite part is just adding detail in any cookie. Like, I just think it's a lot of fun. Today I'm only using royal icing, but if you guys have questions, if we have time at the end, I can show you some other tools that I use to paint onto my cookies as well, for some really detailed work. But today we're just using royal icing, and you can make detail just with that, which is awesome. Okay, so the step 1 for the detail for what we're doing today, we're gonna add these little lines. Normally I would let the cookie dry, and it would, the lines would kind of be risen up above the flooded cookie. But today I am gonna actually do like a wet on wet with the outline consistency. So it's gonna kind of sink into the flood because the flood's not dry, but that's totally fine. And again, it's another thing you can do if you prefer that. Just for today's purposes, that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, so we're gonna start kind of doing 2 lines on the outside, and then we'll kind of come into the middle. And then as you can see, once you're done, you're gonna have all of this in step 2, they'll all be filled in. And again, this is your outline consistency that you're using for this. And Then I didn't make the pink color today just because of time, but it's the same outline consistency and you're just using a pink color. I'll probably use my white outline to show you this part. And you can start in the middle and then kind of work your way out to make those little flowers on the cactus. And then as you can see, you add some little white detail work and you have a beautiful little cactus. Yay. And you have lovely cookies. So one of the sets I did, I actually added the little glasses. It's summertime, kind of gives you that vibe. That's why I chose this to work with today. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing and show you the last demo, and then I will answer your questions if you have any. Okay, so I'm gonna work with, and because it's been sitting here for a minute, as you can see, I use these all the time. Like usually my pants are wet and because I have them sitting, like my wet paper towel sitting on my lap. But I think that they're my go-to. So I'm gonna start at the top, and again, I'm just letting that icing fall onto the cookie. You're not pressing hard into it or you're gonna crush your icing. You're literally just gently letting it fall. And you can do as many lines as you want or as few. I'm just gonna go with 3 today, but you could add more. And I'm gonna go to each section, and it really just starts to define your cactus. I'm not pressing onto the icing. I'm just letting it fall. And if you don't like it to like poke up there, you can just use your little scribe and clean out any little parts that are poking up. All right, and then we've got this guy, this guy. I'm gonna add 2 in the middle of him. Why not? Letting it fall on there. And then our final one. Okay. So it's really, guys, I can't stress enough, it's about the icing consistency. So hopefully you took some tips from that today. I feel like that's the one thing I feel like I've really gotten used to, and I really, really like knowing what I'm doing with it. So that's what it looks like. And then you can take your white outline, which was that first one I made, and I'm just gonna cut a small little thing. And then to make it a little more fancy, you can just go through, do little delicate dots all along the sides. I'm not gonna do the entire thing, just for, I know that we're running into the end and I wanna leave room for questions, but I wanna show you the idea. And then you would just do that, choose a side to do that along. And then if you wanna do the flowers, you kind of put a little more pressure on your bag and then a little less pressure as you come down. So a little more pressure, little less pressure. And because this isn't watered down, you don't have to wait for it to dry before putting it right next to the one you're doing. Like with flooding, it would just all mesh together if it were really wet. But because this is the outline consistency, you're good. So as you can see, got some little flowers and a cookie.